Hey everybody, John Moore here, and I'm a shamanic practitioner and teacher from the state of Maine in the US. Today I want to talk to you about the shadow, and specifically about shamanic shadow work. How do we work with a shadow from a shamanic perspective? Now, the term the shadow was coined by psychoanalyst Carl Jung in the early 20th century. So it is not strictly a traditional prehistoric shamanic term. However, because it's archetypal and it's a thing that exists for everybody. Everybody's got a shadow. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the shadow is in case you're new to the concept of the shadow. I'm going to talk about how you might begin to work with it non-shamanically if you have no shamanic training whatsoever. And then I'm going to talk about the powerful tool of shamanic journeying and the tools that opens up for doing shadow work. So let's get into it. The shadow. The shadow is this idea of an exile or exiled parts of ourselves. They're parts of ourselves that we hide away and we don't look at. Why? Why are there parts of us that we don't look at? Well, we all know we have an unconscious mind, right? And the shadow is mainly unconscious. However, it will pop up from time to time. It'll creep up from time to time. It'll run our lives if we don't get a handle on it. Why do we exile parts of ourselves? Well, they could be painful to look at, right? There are, parts of us that might be traumatized, or parts of us that we did something that we strongly regret, and that causes us significant guilt when we look at it. There are other parts of us that we have been told by our upbringing, our education, or our culture, or by the media, or our friends, or whoever, that we're told are unacceptable, that are socially, culturally unacceptable. This can be all kinds of things, from emotions. We can be, you might have grown up in a culture that says boys don't cry. So you eat a lot of your sadness, and don't look at it. I don't have sadness. I don't feel that. I don't feel that. But you do. You're human. You might not want to look at those parts of you that are sad. You might have trauma that's really painful to look at. You might have hidden desires. So you might have hidden, everything from hidden sexual desires because you were told that something is inappropriate or not right in your culture or whatever, or culture has informed you that it's deviant and you're going to be rejected if you explore this part of yourself. On up to ways that we, survival mechanisms. Let me talk a little bit about that as well. Some of our survival mechanisms, particularly when we've gone through perhaps a rough childhood or a childhood with lots of trauma, some of our survival mechanisms get locked into our trauma bodies that we're not looking at, but they come out for us in different ways when we're an adult, and sometimes they're not so functional. So things like there's most people know the fight or flight response, but it's actually fight, flight, freeze, or fawn are things that we do to survive. When we're under threat, we either run away, we flee, we fight, we freeze up, or we fawn. We become, these people who take care of those who are threatening to us. We try to win them over to our side, all these things. So these survival mechanisms can get locked into place, and they come up. A really good way to find out, really good pointer to what kind of wounds and things are in your shadow, because we don't necessarily know until we start looking at this stuff, is what things trigger you, what things cause over-the-top emotional reactions for you, and perhaps emotional reactions where you say, wow, that's really not like me. Where did that come from? It's a really great indicator of some shadow material. Somebody makes a rude face at me and I explode with anger. Where did that come from? Somehow that's linked to some trauma or something in my history, in my shadow, something I'm not looking at. And those links don't have to be exact. It can be something that reminds me of something else, something that's associated with something else. I knew somebody that went to a therapist, got a referral to a therapist to help deal with some trauma. And when she showed up, the therapist resembled strongly the family member that she had had the traumatic experience with. And she's like, I can't work with you, and explained why. And the therapist said, yeah, absolutely, 100%. I understand where you're coming from. I will find, another referral. Our minds know intellectually that's not the person who traumatized me, but the association is there. And the part of us that's getting triggered, that's getting re-triggered, is probably in our shadow. So we have all kinds of things. Our hidden desires, our triggers are really good indicators. And excuse me, are the other thing that is a really good indicator are things that drive us crazy about other people. I'm not talking about sensory issues like somebody chewing really loudly gets on my nerves. That can be a sensory issue, or somebody who's actually doing harm to me, right? Somebody who steals from me or punches me in the face or something like that. That's not a pet peeve kind of issue. But if you have things like, I can't stand people who listen to country music, or I can't stand people, and there's not logic behind it. It's not something that's actually causing you harm or pain or whatever. Look to that as an indicator, a strong indicator of shadow material. These are some good ways to get started. One of my recommendations, I tell this to all my students, I've taught this in classes. I got this from another teacher who got it from another teacher, is to start keeping a trigger journal. You don't have to keep it for the rest of your life. You can if you want. But a month should be, if you get triggered a lot, maybe even shorter than that. Every time you have an emotional reaction, a reaction, meaning, something happens and you react to it without thinking about it, write it down. Write down, the time and the date, where you were, what you were doing, what happened, and what your reaction was to that. And then after a month, look at those things. Look at those as pointers to shadow material. Okay. And this is a great way you can get started without any shamanic training whatsoever. So let's talk about the world of shamanism a little bit in regards to shadow work. One of my favorite things to lead students through is a shadow work process created by my teacher. I won't be handing that out over YouTube or anything. It's not mine to do that with. But it's been a very powerful process that I go back to time and time again in my own practice. In shamanism, there is this concept called becoming the hollow bone. And what that means is we become a clear channel, like a hollow bone. You can imagine a hollow tube for spirit to work through. In order to do that, you have to work on your junk. You have to work on your shadow material. You have to work on your emotional health, your mental health, even your physical health sometimes. You have to clean out the junk so that you can be a clearer spirit. You're not putting your spin on things. If somebody comes to me and is traumatized by something that is similar to the way I was traumatized as a child, I can't have my egoic self jumping in and taking over the show, right? I still have to be a clear channel for spirit when I'm working with clients. So there's this idea of becoming the hollow bone, getting hollowed out, going through initiations, and a lot of this is doing your own work. If you're any kind of spiritual practitioner, read tarot cards, do Reiki, do shamanic practice, do something else, and you are not constantly doing your own work, and you might feel like you are enlightened and already ascended into the fifth dimension, whatever all of those terms are, you might feel all of that, but go back and do your cleanup work. Okay, go back and do your shadow work and continue doing it. There's no harm that's going to come from doing your shadow work. Now, there is a thought that may come up for you that, I have these, somebody does something to me and this violent impulse comes up, and if I don't keep that in my shadow, I'm going to become a serial killer. Or I have these hidden sexual desires. And if I don't, if I look at my shadow and those come up, I'm going to cheat on my partner, or, I'm going to do something illegal, or, whatever. And that's just not true. We don't lose our ethics or our brains or any of those things by integrating shadow parts, by working with bringing them out into the light and looking at them. What happens though is if those things are kept in the shadow, they can creep up on us and control our lives and run our lives and do things to us when we become reactive. We are not in control when those things happen. When those things are in the shadow, we are not in control all the time of our actions. We're still responsible. You are 100% responsible for your actions, even if you don't have control of them. And that is why doing shadow work is absolutely critical. What happens with some spiritual leaders, spiritual teachers, is they may reach a very high level of spiritual development, but they haven't done their cleanup work. And this is when we see spiritual teachers who sexually abuse their followers, who, steal things, who financially abuse their followers. We see all kinds of abuse coming out of those situations where this should be a trusted leader, a trusted advisor, a trusted teacher. We see it time and time and time again, so many stories of this happening. Because people haven't done their cleanup work. And you can get to a very high level of spiritual realization. You can even develop, in my opinion, supernatural abilities, things that people would look at that they've only, read about most people have only read about in what they might consider mythology. These things can happen. And if you haven't done your work, you can still have underlying drives that cause problems for you, because now you're more powerful. It's like handing a gun to a toddler, right? Very dangerous. You've given over power, but there hasn't been the cleanup work. There hasn't been the emotional cleanup or the maturity or that sort of thing to handle the power. And these people can become very charismatic. That is a part of it. People are attracted to their energy, and can be blinded to what's going on with this person who hasn't been doing their shadow work. So, shamanism is a particular set of, one definition is a particular set of spiritual tools and practices. The main practice of shamanism is called journeying. This involves going into an altered state of consciousness, working with helping spirits, and traveling in non-ordinary reality. So in spiritual worlds that are, parallel to our own. The reason that shamanism is really, really good for working with the shadow is that we can get first of all, we have access to helping spirits who can help us along with the shadow work aspect. Second of all, we can gain conscious awareness of parts of ourselves that are hidden by our conscious mind because we're in an altered state. The altered state is one part of the tool set we have. It's not the only tool set. I would not use that by itself, but it's an important one. And what happens is the brain starts to change. That changes its operating system a little bit. We switch over from, one operating system to another. When we go into this altered state, perceptions are altered, and now we can start to see into the spiritual realms, which include aspects of ourselves that might be exiled. We can see these parts, we can meet with them. What we do when we meet with them is a long process, and something that you should go through with a teacher who is experienced in leading people through this shadow experience. But what I will tell you is that we don't eliminate shadow aspects. We don't kill them off. You can't, first of all, they're parts of you. Um, we don't get rid of them. What we do is we integrate with them. We find out what their intention is. Every aspect has a positive intention. Even if it comes out in ways, the way that it expresses itself is really negative. So, for an example, a part of you that becomes really triggered when somebody speaks to you disrespectfully might be a very protective aspect of yourself. Its intention might be to protect you from being shamed or being harmed or something along those lines. It might also, there are parts of you that are also somewhat needy, that need attention, that need, sustenance, that need this, that need that, right? And these parts can lead to habits that form, sometimes unhealthy habits, sometimes just simple like attention seeking or creating drama in friendship situations. Okay. But there's a positive intention behind that part. That part is doing something for you and it was useful at one point in your life. It is expressing itself in a way that is no longer useful. And you can meet with these parts, form agreements with them, make sure they get what they need. And in sort of higher levels of shamanic work, you can actually transform these inner parts of yourself into allies. But it involves an open line of communication. We're not normally consciously communicating with our shadow parts, or they wouldn't be shadow parts. Now, there are systems that come out of Jungian psychoanalysis, like internal family systems, that does a lot of this work kind of non-shamanically, and it's very powerful. And while I haven't personally experienced that type of therapy, I've read a lot about it, and I think it's really good work, and maybe something to check out. But adding shamanic tools, you now have helping spirits, altered states of consciousness, the ability to sort of disconnect from the body, disconnect from the ego a little bit, and move into a space that's a little more conducive to doing this kind of work. So anyway, that's just a little bit about shamanic shadow work. I hope this has been helpful. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. There's a link to my website below if you want to find out more about what I do, what I teach, that sort of thing. And I will talk to you